Hey everyone, I'm Elsa Gamer, and welcome back to Malicious Fallen. We're here in the backstories once more for the final story for Demise. So, here you guys go. Chapter 1. The Palace of Salvation. This most holy of places, found inside the walls of the wheeled citadel of the National Church, is where those who violated doctrine would have their souls purified by the very faith they rejected. However, to those heretics it was spoken of as nothing more than a site of execution, a place in which the self would be forever lost. And so, on this day, the screams of so-called infidels rang out, till all that remained was resentment toward the two kings who presided over the affair. "Please, oh please, I beg you, spare the children," said one heretic to the twin kings, bowing her head in supplication. The first was known as the Executioner King, and was rightful ruler of his nation. The second was the Hierophant, who held the highest position within the church. In the heretic's arms slept a newly born babe, and clinging to her stood a young boy, clearly frightened out of his wits. The mother's eyes burned fiercely. She was prepared to meet her fate, if it would mean her children's safety. The Hierophant leaned in close to the mother, and ever so gently, as gently as if he were picking up shards of broken glass, took the slumbering babe from her arms. "I shall grant your plea. Let us show kindness to this poor babe." "You mean only to spare my baby? But what of my son?" All of a sudden, a savage gale began to roar, swallowing the mother's words with it, as a ferocious, bone-grinding din consumed the space around them. As the sound died away, two shapes could be seen, the barely recognizable remnants of what were once mother and son. The Hierophant drew close to what was once the mother, a smile spreading from ear to ear, and spoke to the babe cradled in his arms. "We have saved the sullied souls of your dear family and made them pure. For their sakes, you should pray with me, my child, to guide their souls ascend to the land of eternal repose." The look on the Hierophant's face as he caressed the poor child betrayed no hint of remorse, nothing to suggest any guilt of having taken its family away. He beamed as if he had performed a worthy deed. Indeed, it was a look of great content that then defined his countenance. "You are mad," gasped one of the heretics. "I am nothing but. I assure you, it was entirely the right thing to do. If you think otherwise, well, it is merely proof of your soul's befoulment. Our righteous faith dates back to the distant past. It was in the Dark Ages, when all was chaos and strife, ravaged by the flames of war, that God blessed this country through the hierarchy, who would found our religion, that it may save both man and his world from impending catastrophe. So it is written in our sacred texts. Those cursed by belief in other religions, those infidels, unclean of soul, can only be saved through the purification of death. To ignore the heretical would be to allow malice to seep from their souls, contaminating the world and beckoning forth the great calamity known as the Malicious. So it is ordained that we must save you and your ilk. Through the purification of your filthy souls, we protect this world and its people. So said the Hierophant, his face a mask of benevolence. How could we believe such nonsense? How could anyone believe in tenets as twisted a man as you would preach? Once again, their voices were silenced by the same roaring gale, but this time, when the noise subsided, only lumps of flesh remained. Proof, indeed, that the king had brandished his noble weapon in the name of salvation. Your Majesty, even if they were the words of heretics, you would do well to give them your ear. Their filthy presence was too pitiful to bear. I could not continuance it. I apologize, I'm having trouble with this particular word. Spoke the Executioner King, smirking at the Hierophant's rebuke. You are much too kind, Your Majesty. However, you would do well to exercise your magnificence and magnificence. Without prejudice, I am well aware. Oh, poor heretic. By my hand, you are now saved, said the Executioner King, flourishing his noble weapon as he spoke. Whenever salvation was to be enacted in that place, pleas for help and cries of resentment were sure to abound, though never ever had a single one of them given pause to either king. For there was faith in their hearts, a tragic faith born of their religious zeal, which, in turn, birthed a twisted pity toward the heretics. This resulted ultimately in their unwavering belief in the act of mortal salvation. All was still in the palace of salvation. The twin kings and newborn aside, the myriad of heretics brought there were now little more than globs of flesh. A bloody stench began to fill the air. For those few souls cleansed by our hand, let us pray, may you be saved and rise to the land of eternal respect. Yeah. Amid the hideous scene of blood and fleshly horror, the Hierophant spoke solemnly, head held high toward the heavens as he prayed, paying no mind to the blood spoiling his remnant. As he took to one knee, it was a prayer most earnest. There seemed to be something troubling you, Your Majesty. Might I have sensed some hesitance in enacting your deeds today, or... No. Mayhap it was an inner conflict I perceived, to which the Executioner King remained resolutely silent. I hope you do not harbor the same doubts about our faith that the heretics we are duty-bound to cleanse possess. Ridiculous! Interrupted the Executioner King in protest. He continued to persuade the Hierophant, I am devout disciple. I would gladly offer my flesh for the good of our faith. And not a speck of doubt could be heard in the king's proud posturing, demonstrating clearly the conviction of his faith. The two stared each other down in heated silence until, mere moments later, the Hierophant bowed his head. It must have been my imagination. I apologize, Your Majesty. Dear Hierophant, I give my all to the faith. To deny that is no more or less than to deny my very being. And such it is that I can harbor no doubts. Except what, Your Majesty? There is but one thought that haunts me, that the act of salvation we have chosen to perform is itself one drenched in sin. The king's voice, full of dignity only moments before, had turned full bitter as he bore his heart to the Hierophant. Though he believed in his faith, there was conflict in his heart. Something that couldn't bear his actions, some indefinable. In agony he could no longer disregard. However, in the face of the king's anguish, the Hierophant let out a hearty sigh, and triumphant smile began to form on his lips. I see. So that is what troubles your majesty. It seems you have finally taken a step to reaching a higher state of being, my liege. What is your meaning, Hierophant? Well, how do I put this? In deference to your maturation, allow me to counsel your majesty. Once you overcome the conflict, nay, hesitation, you will come upon the very essence of our faith, and when you come upon it, my dear liege, you will no longer be the executioner king, simply relieving the poor heretics of their sins as you judge them, but will be reborn as the cleanser king, who will truly save the world. Embrace your inner turmoil. That very turmoil is right, is just, and is essential to you. So spoke the Hierophant, who, after saying his piece, left the Palace of Salvation, still carrying the newborn in his arms, leaving the turmoil-filled king, rather the executioner king, alone. However, the twin kings were not to know, or rather, they had not noticed that the answers they sought were to be twisted beyond their wildest imaginations, and indeed it was their very zeal that would mean they were betraying the very tenets they believed in. The ruined capital of convergent wisdom, what was once the home of the prophets, stands now only as a ruin. Still, it is here that the pinnacle of the prophets' wisdom lies enshrined, the grand equational processor. Though some of the buildings had begun to crumble, the capital's former splendor cannot escape one's notice, even as the steady fall of snow slowly paints it over in purest white. In this place lies no trace of man, woman, or indeed any trace of life at all. The only disturbance is the echoing sound of the ground equational processor, working away, a noise signifying the preparations being undertaken for the purpose of order reformation, and stood in front of the clanking and whirring equational processor was none other than the prophet known as Manos, speaking loudly to his compatriots, saying he had devised a plan to save the world of man. Our former plan to regulate the world using religion, revelation, and suppression may have failed, but it has bestowed upon us two kernels of knowledge. Firstly, as long as man exists, so will malice. And secondly, even as time passes, never will man's nature change. These conclusions drawn by the prophets would have been perfectly natural had they been drawn by men, and would only have been discovered through a kind of natural providence. However, the prophets themselves refused to accept the truth. If only man had the power of the prophets, who had themselves evolved from men, mankind would undoubtedly be able to suppress the malice, or so the prophets foolishly believed. From the knowledge we've gained, we can surmise that the very nature of man itself is cursed, and that true peace will never come to the human world. This is something we have no choice but to change. Such arrogance was to be expected from a prophet. If it was for the sake of fostering a true peace in the human world, they would bend the very providence that made man what it was. So it is we must forge ahead with the reform of order. It is our only means of denying man's very essence, changing order itself, and in turn saving man from himself. This I truly, wholly believe. The other prophets nodded in deep agreement with Manos. The plan to reform order. It was Manos, leader of the prophets, who came up with the idea. A plan made to reforge the human world into one of peace and tranquility, a world the prophets sorely desired. In order to carry out this plan, they meant to alter the very order in which the world was built, which would in turn force the sublimation of the human soul. In doing so, man would be immortal, becoming immortal spirits. Material spirits of the prophet's ilk. Upon the success of the scheme, man would no longer fear the calamity, and the world of man would finally be exalted, or so the prophets hoped. However, to perform the corrections necessary for order reformation, even the grand equation processor would require an exceptional amount of time, which is why we built the cleansing apparatus to ensure the survival of the human world until the processor completes its work. And so we must protect the apparatus at all costs until our time has come. So said Manos with unwavering certainty. Everyone listening knew he had the conviction to see his plan through no matter what. However, his words implied the existence of obstacles to the plan. Good Manos, you speak as if there will be a problem with the apparatus. Manos nodded solemnly in response to the prophet's words, and speaking with great care, explained what might occur to the cleansing apparatus. If the world were to remain as it is now, I foresee no problems. However, the human world is rife with tyranny and oppression, fanning the flames of conflict. If these flames were to spread, the human world would be consumed by war, filling it with enormous quantities of malice. Whether or not the apparatus can adequately perform the cleansing is as yet unclear. If it cannot, we must prepare for the Malicious to appear with greater force than ever. The Malicious return? Those dire words filled the silent air between the prophets with dread. With the spirit vessel sealed away, we have no means of opposing the Malicious. It is therefore imperative that we not allow such a situation to arise. The spirit vessel of which Manos spoke was in possession of an extraordinary strength, granted by the soul's attainment of two unstable powers. These were the otherworld spirit and the malice that had contaminated it. However, the contamination itself was a critical problem, as the prophets feared that if the spread did not cease, the vessel itself would become one of the Malicious. And so it came to pass that, after numerous meetings in the wake of its last battle, the prophets decided to seal away the spirit vessel before its contamination could reach that critical point, before it could wake, before it might turn into a Malicious. It was confined far, far away, so that it might be cleansed, which meant that the prophets had lost their greatest weapon. It was this event that catalyzed the human world's plummet into chaos, a simple byproduct of raising the twin kings to power. whose faith would fan the flames of war. The prophets were left with little choice in the matter, but the fault lay in their deeds. The Twin Kings brought true evil to the human world, though the prophets had foreseen that very situation arising. As long as the Twin Kings reign in possession of a noble weapon, tyranny and oppression will never cease. But greater conflict will be averted. None from the human world can hope to depose them, and we may continue to make use of the cleansing apparatus. While this respite continues, we are free to pursue the reform of order, though if the conflict were to spread, there is nothing in our means. What of Hexa, Manos? He's hatching a scheme, I'm sure. Waste not your thoughts on him. Whatever he's up to, it does not intrude on our plan to reform order. What could he ever hope to achieve alone? More importantly, he could never hope to catch up to us. Whatever he thinks about the reformation of order, nay, he grasps not our methods. To alter order is an unending interference, or so he insists. To protect the world of man, Manos and the others would freely intervene in its affairs. Hexia, however, held a different philosophy. He would employ the bare minimum of intervention and allow man to protect his own world. This divide in their beliefs opened a small rift between them, which only grew larger after the failure of the plan to unify all human thought through religion. The rift was now so large that their differences could never be reconciled. Except the two did indeed share the same ultimate goal, to create a stable world for man to live in, and go on observing once their work in the human world was done. Right to the end, it was because of this that neither considered the other an enemy. But even this would change once Manos told Hexia of his plan to reform order. Hexia stopped coming to the prophets' meetings, and so suspicious of his actions, the other prophets reconfigured the spirit vessel seal. Though they knew not Hexia's purpose, Manos was able to deduce his line of thought. In the not-too-distant future, Hexia will betray us, like the undead king, and Tessalus before him. However, we have no time to worry about such an event. The time left to us is precious little. The other prophets nodded upon hearing Manos' speech. The plan must succeed at all costs. That is, at any cost. It is our sole chance to escape the threat of the Malicious for good, the sole way to save the human world. So Manos implored the other prophets, and perhaps himself, as there was the smallest hint in his manner, the very smallest hint that there was uncertainty in his heart. The ring of binding built in the furthest reaches of the White Room. This was a prison built for the sole purpose of holding the spirit vessel, who had been tainted by the Malicious, in a place even the prophets would not venture without good reason. The vessel was bound in what seemed to be a gentle slumber, behind layer upon layer of restraints. In the center, alongside it, was the Gaoler, born of the same binding rituals which held the vessel in order to observe it. All around was still a stagnant air through which no wind blew, a place that would stand eternal. All of a sudden, the Gaoler ceased its duty. I guess that's supposed to be jailer. Almost as if someone had ordered it to do so, and Hexa appeared, as if he'd smeared in through the very air. As I thought, I can only stop it temporarily. Things would be considerably easier if only I could control it. However, it seems I have no choice. Hexia muttered to himself, as he tampered with the vessel's bonds, using whatever tricks he could muster. I won't stand for any more of this excessive meddling. The more we interfere, the more corrupt the human world becomes. The evidence is clear from what's happening there now. Ergo, this is the path of my choosing. Nay, as a prophet who wishes to protect humanity, this was my only choice. Though he spoke only to himself, his voice carried with it great determination as he stood before the bound vessel. A most interesting topic indeed, Hexia. Ripples formed in the air as the figure revealed himself. It was none other than Thessalos, Hexia's former kin, bringing with him a vessel of his own creation. Thessalos, that vessel, it's... Oh dear. Is something the matter, Hexia? There's no need to stare so hard at my little puppet. I merely thought that, upon seeing it, I must show you the error of our ways. The depths of our sin is abundant. Indeed, we can hardly atone for all the casualties of our meddling. I see, but Hexa, my fellow, do you not think you are becoming a touch too empathetic? I don't think I'm saying this word right at all. This thing is merely a doll, powered by the recycled vestiges of a soul. However convenient a puppet it might be, I can scarcely imagine any good coming from empathizing with a doll. Well, this is where we will have to agree to disagree. More importantly, what business do you have? Do you, estranged from us, have in this place? Does it involve us, perchance? Hexa was only too well aware that something wasn't right. After all, here, Thessalos was in this place with his vessel. Thessalos smiled wryly at Hex's questions. Indeed it does, but first I must correct you on something. It is mere chance I happen to be here with this puppet of mine. Your suspicion concerning that is unwarranted. Chance it is. You'll forgive me for finding that hard to believe. It is a matter of little import. Is it not natural for a parent to see its child from time to time, even if that child is in something of a bind? So, said Thessalos, looking now upon the puppet. The puppet beside him, saying nothing, stared in silence at its child. The vessel now sailed away, and unable even to move, the prophets had taken it, used it, and finally forced it to put an end to itself. It was no more than a tragic accident born of the prophet's arrogance. I must admit, I find it hard to follow your logic. Oh dear, I appear to have upset you. Well, since I do not wish to distress you any further, let us speak of more important matters. I wish to conclude the business I came here to conduct. I am here for one reason alone, that is to ask you, dear Hexa, a question. Why have you chosen to act as you do? I see you are prepared even to break the vessel's seal. What is your purpose in this act? I have no need to tell you. Have you any proof you are my ally? Nay, that you are no enemy to me. I suggest you leave if you cannot. Thessalis had estranged himself from the prophets, it was true. However, whether or not he would ally himself with Hexa was an entirely different matter. If Hexa were to speak of his plan to Thessalis, there was ever chance it might fail. After all, he would not jeopardize his plan by answering Thessalis. I don't blame you for being cautious. Well, so it must be. This should earn your trust. Thessalis pulled a jewel out of thin air and handed it to Hexa. What is it? A tool with which you may analyze the binding rituals which comprise the cell and its greatest prison. It will also activate the vessel, strengthening its bond to the otherworld spirit, may even be used to temporarily wrest control of the grand equation processor. Hexa's eyes fully widened. The key to the bonds, the key to the cell, both things created after Thessalis' defection. But here was a thing which would have use in each sphere of the prophet's most accomplished endeavors. All other prophets were skilled in one field and one alone, having little to no knowledge of aught else. This was unprecedented. Thessalis had mastered all disciplines, even attaining superior knowledge to the construction of this very prison. Even more impressively, he alone, among the prophets, had managed to devise a method to use the grand equational processor. By what means do you possess such knowledge? Even we know not the means to override the grand equational processor. I'm afraid I cannot say, but if you will allow me to speak, I worked on many things before I left. So, have I earned your trust? 'Tis a fair deal, I say. Hexia considered the information ventured by Thessalis to be of considerable worth. The problems facing Hexa paled in comparison to that which could be gained from Thessalis' knowledge. Hexa accepted the proposal. He had no other choice. Very well, Thessalis, but before I tell you, allow me one question. What are your thoughts on the world as it stands? Candidly speaking, the world has been warped thanks to our interference, or so one might venture. But what are words without deeds? Enough. This despicable world is entirely the product of our meddling in human affairs. Is there any need to put it like that? Our meddling meant the creation of the cleansing apparatus, and it is thanks to that that the Malicious appear no longer. I cannot refute that, however. It is not without its flaws that weigh too heavy upon me. Is that really of such import to you? Wherever would you come by such a conclusion? Upon hearing Hexa speak, Tesla's face no, I'm not gonna say that. Face was a mask of doubt. The cleansing apparatus was the peak of the prophet's achievement, a device made to ensure the slumber of the malicious. In the face of such a fact, to raise an objection was absurd. However, Hexia did indeed object. The apparatus absorbs people's malice in order to purify them. However, it is the side effect to which I object. It is more than just absorb the malice seeping into the world. The act of cleansing it interferes with people's very souls in the process. The longer this process continues, the more corrupt men's souls will become, until madness takes them all. Humans are born with malice inside them. In other words, it is a part of what makes humanity human. What effect would forcefully purging their souls of it have? It would it would beckon madness, to be sure. The whole process was maleficence masquerading as benevolence. And that is not all. There is something else, I fear. The quantity of malice and the apparatus can purge in one go. It may be able to purge an infinite amount, but there is most certainly a limit to how much it can take in at one time. If full-scale war were to break out, calling forth malice on a scale hitherfore unseen, we have no way of knowing if the apparatus could purify it all at once. A failure of a device, then, seems rather unexpected for one of your combined efforts. That I cannot refute. So the apparatus is to blame for the current shape of the world, you say? The scene was reflected in Thessalis' eyes. It was true. It was they who were descended from those who first heard revelation, who would slaughter men and call it cleansing. I cannot entirely agree. The apparatus is indeed one case, but it is only one. Mankind's very nature is the most prominent cause. It is man's greed, in combination with malice, that gives rise to conflict. Such was the natural state of man. Humans were creatures of greed, and in acting upon the desires of their greed-filled hearts, conflict arises. The prophets, however, were simply unable to accept this fact as true. Manos and the others have come to learn this through the failure of their religious scheme. That failure only led to their plan to reform order. The plan to reform order, an attempt to ascend the human soul to make them as we are, beings of spirit, is it not? If such a plan were to succeed, they would be free of their fleshly bonds. Immortal, yes, and in turn, the conflict born of man's nature would no longer threaten the world, and a universe everlasting stability would be possible at last. Yes, how very like Manos to concoct such a scheme. Man's true essence lies in the soul, not the flesh, that holds it. Rather, it is because the body exists that man can feel loss, and thereby give birth to malice. Manos and the others believed that relinquishing the flesh and becoming soul alone would free man from loss, and no more malice would be produced. Hexia and Thessalis, however, thought differently. They believed that man was both soul and flesh together, and to lack either was to lack humanity. Even more so, loss and malice, too, were part of what made humans human. To lose those would also be to lose part of man's essence. To change man, however, imperceptibly. Indeed, I question whether humans in such a state could really be called human at all. And should Manos and the others reform the world, I doubt whether it could any longer be called the world of man. Yes, I have many doubts indeed. So said Thessalis, as he stared Hexia in the eye. He seemed to be asking, is the world you wish for truly a world such as this? Would you truly be able to welcome such a place? Well said, Thessalis. We're of the same mind. Not for the world would I support such a plan. I would go so far as to say that While their methods might differ, what Manos and his lot are trying to achieve differs very little from he who was our sworn enemy, the Undead King. The disgust Hexia felt towards Manos and the others rang clear in his voice. Thessalis couldn't help but smile sardonically at the fact. Hexa, Thessalis, or even Minos, and the others, all prophets, all sharing the same vision, the same purpose, yet the means in which they would reach their shared goal could not have been more different. Thessalis was sure, since ages long past, that the organization of prophets would not last long, and so took his leave. Now then, Hexa, how do you suggest we proceed? I think you know already. You intend to defect from Manos's group, do you not? Defection, you say? You are not wrong, but nor are you entirely correct. I intend to protect man from the threat of order reformation. To do so, I have but one option to do. Do I not? His words certainly sounded like a clear decision to leave Manos's group and let slip his determination. Hexa's words certainly seemed to please Thessalis, a sinister grin now forming on his lips. It seems you're planning to dispose of Manos and the others. I see. That's the little trick you've employed. For the bindings, when the time comes, the vessel can be freed. By... Thessalis' eyes were fixed on the sealway vessel. Even he had no idea how powerful it would be. Now contaminated by malice and fused with the otherworld spirit, this vessel was made to be a vanquisher, one who would reap away the human world's conflicts and strife, the world's guardian, in other words, one who quells those who would fuel the cycle of revenge. The malicious, the holy descendants, and even the prophets. As Hexa expressed that, the prophets were nothing more than one of several threats to the human world. He looked Thessalis in the eye. I see. Are you saying that even I will not escape your ire? If you were to become a threat to the human world, Thessalis. I'll remember those words, Hexa. Even then, you would seek to employ the vessel, of course, to defeat those who have brought chaos to the world. You would have little choice but to have it play the Slayer once more. There's little time before the reformation of order is complete. Considering the circumstances, there is little other choice. You are prepared to practice what you preach, I see, but the vessel is deeply stained by malice. The binding has stopped the contamination spread, but releasing the vessel would mean a sudden... So it was that Manos' group had undertaken such thorough means in binding the vessel, such that it would never wake of its own volition. They did not account for Hexa's willingness to break those bonds, however. You speak truly, Thessalis, but there is indeed a way. If one were to use the transformative properties of the White Rune. I see. Then please proceed. I am most interested in this furtive plan of yours, and what will come of it. I am most interested to see if it is you or Manos who will remain standing. And with those words, Thessalis disappeared, taking his vessel with him. In order to utilize the power of the White Rune, essential to shriving the power of malice from the vessel, I must first harness the computational power of the grand equational processor. Manos, for the sake of a world in which man holds the reins of his own destiny, I swear I won't let you have your way. So said Hexa, as he looked upon the vessel, eyes resolute. He knew what must be done, and he would not stray from that path, and with Hexa's iron determination, a new tale marking the beginning of the end was begun.